Long days, pleasant nights, and welcome to Kingslingers, a Doof Media podcast journeying through Stephen King's Dark Tower series and beyond. I am your host, constant reader Scott Daly, and joining me as always, he's crawling out of the muck of an 80-year-old swimming pool, ready to charge at us with love. It's Matt Freeman. How's it going today, Matt?
I'm just going to give you a hug with my mouth.
This week, our 8-part series covering Stephen King's Duma Key continues with part 6. We're chatting about chapters 15 through 17 of the novel. In this week's reading, Edgar realizes his paintings are dangerous, but not quickly enough to stop the deaths of several people, including his beloved Ilsa. The quartet makes their way to South Duma and the confrontation with Percy that awaits them there. Oh boy, we're almost at the end. Matt, what did you think of this week's reading?
Well, everything certainly escalated, perhaps even more so than I thought it would. I mean, I think we were pretty sure last week that Elsa was going to die. Mm-hmm. But I wouldn't have predicted necessarily that so many people were going to die. I don't know that was, I don't think it was completely not foreshadowed, but I guess I'll just say, yeah, the sort of the magnitude of the supernatural reach was more than I imagined it would be.
Our number's at 4, right? It's Tom, Cayman, Ilsa, and then Mary Eyre herself, of course.
Yeah. Yes, exactly. Yeah. I mean, it was in a sense it's great stuff. In another sense, it's not fun, right? It's like it's like the least fun thing to read is like, this is the part of the book when all of the characters that you love die. So like part of me appreciates the artistry of like, okay, you got these emotions out of me, so fair play to you. But another part of me, which is sort of the part that's just reading the book, is like, man, this sucks, you know?
Yeah. And I mean, you're right. We've kind of been building to this the whole time, and we were able to have fun while we were building to it. But it's here now, and this was a bummer. It was a bummer. Like I knew this was coming. We all knew this was coming, but I especially knew it was coming, and it was as rough to read this time as it always is.
Yeah, I found once again that knowing that it was coming did not make it hit any less hard. So
yeah, which is really proof positive for King's whole thing with this kind of tell you it's going to happen before it happens thing.
Right.
Well, we'll be talking about that a lot more today.
Yep.
All right, Matt, let's go ahead and get into it. Before we do that, we have a couple of quick announcements. The first, we just want to remind you folks once again that tickets for our live show in June are still for sale. You can head to doofmedia.com/Kingslingers live, and that will take you over to the Ticket Spice page, which has those tickets for sale. I think there's like 50 or so tickets left still. So it's a pretty big auditorium we're filling. So that's a lot of people going to be there still, but it's going to be a lot of fun. If you haven't got a chance to buy your ticket yet, now is the time to do it. I just booked my plane ticket this week, so finally got that done. So we're ready. We have no more planning we have to do.
Yeah, no, it's awesome. So yeah, please consider looking at those tickets for the live, the first ever live show we've done.
First and last. Just kidding. Just kidding.
It's no, Scott. It's going to be just like Edgar's art gala. You know, it's the beginning of his career.
Yeah.
Oh.
Why would you do that? Which of our daughters are we going to lose now, Matt?
Oh no, this is horrible.
It's going to be so much fun, though. I mean, like, gosh, it's going to be an absolute blast. I can't wait. It's rapidly approaching. Buying the plane tickets, we bought the plane tickets, and my wife and I are doing a main trip after everything that weekend, and we booked all our hotels and did everything. So it's like, crap. Here we go. We're almost there. I'm so excited.
Me too.
Yeah. So once again, head to doofmedia.com/Kingslingers live, all one word. You will get all the information on the show and a link to our ticketing website where you can still purchase one of the 44 tickets remaining for that live event with Robin Firth, the author of the Dark Tower Concordance and a longtime friend and associate of Stephen King. She's going to be there and chat with us for a couple hours. So that's going to be really cool. I can't wait.
Me too.
One more quick announcement. We just wanted to let you know what we're doing on our other show. Remember, Matt, we have another podcast we don't talk about on here.
How could I forget?
We have the Doofcast, which is our kind of just grab all whatever we feel like talking about show. It's normally movies and TV, though. The last 10 weeks, roughly, Matt, I think, right? 10 weeks
Yep.
ish. I think that would make
Yeah,
sense.
I think
We've been
exactly
taking a look
10,
at
yeah.
all of the 10 Best Picture nominees for the 2024 Oscars, which just occurred a couple weekends ago. So we watched all those movies, we talked about them, and that concluded last week. And I think that's worth checking out if you're curious about the Oscars, if you're curious about any of these movies, or you watched any of these movies and just want to hear what other people had to say about them. You can head on over to the Doofcast and check out that series. We're going to be starting a new series here pretty soon. Still working on what exactly that's going to be. But if you haven't checked out the Doofcast, it's more of this pretty much, except movies and not Stephen King.
Yeah, I feel like
Usually.
sometimes we make it seem like oh yeah, it's just a little throwaway show. It's like, well, I mean, we put about as much effort into that show as we put into this show, really. So it's a good show. And yeah, we if you watched any of the 10 Best Picture nominees this year, or if you didn't and you were just curious about them and you want to hear how they were, then go check that out. Like Scott said,
I agree. All right, on with the show. Let's get into it. Chapter 15. It's titled Intruder. And Matt, I really like how this chapter is doing like a lot of work because, of course, we have the intruder to Edgar's room that we see in the scary ghost man, zombie, ghost, vampire, unclear. But also, that it calls to Ilsa and the intruder in her house. Like, there's a lot of intruding going on here in all of these chapters.
That's true. We haven't focused too much on the chapter titles in this book, but there is often a wonderfully ambiguous sort of handle that can refer to a bunch of things, which is not a thing that King usually does, as far as I can recall.
Yeah, I mean, he's kind of relatively inconsistent about whether he names chapters at all. Like sometimes he does, sometimes he doesn't. It all depends. And I think it is interesting to perhaps maybe this is an exercise worth doing of like cataloging all the stories in which he does write chapter titles and stories in which he doesn't, and see what the difference is, if there's a purpose to that.
Yeah, and then sometimes he'll title like sections, right?
Yeah. Like he'll have like books within his book. Yeah, those have titles, but then the chapters will have no title. It's all different. He likes to switch it up. He has no set style. In that regard, at least.
Yeah, I mean, and this one I think is interesting, right? Because it's like, chapter 15, but then within chapter 15, there's several, I don't know what to call them, subsections or subchapters where, it's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, whatever.
Yeah.
Which in normal circumstances you would just call that a chapter. That's the thing he does fairly often. I'm just thinking
that.
About
I think
this.
He's pretty consistent about almost always doing that. Right there. Yeah.
And it's not that, I mean, we read a lot of books, right? And I don't think that's certainly far from a common way of breaking up books. I just think that's interesting, right?
Yeah.
Structurally.
Yeah. It is. I mean, it might be, like I said, it might be worth having like bringing data to this conversation, having a larger scope conversation about, why he does this and what his actual section and chapter and book structural breakdown looks like, because it's different. Yeah
it's interesting. I feel like we could have a whole sidebar conversation about how he breaks things up and how that relates to pacing, but maybe instead of doing that up front, we can just keep that in mind as we go.
Yeah, for sure. All right, so we pick up on this chapter with Edgar basically right where we left off with him last week. He has his Libet pictures in hand and is preparing to draw his way to the answers to the story. Matt, I think you made a complaint, and I put that in air quotes because you really weren't complaining last week, about how Elizabeth maybe could have done a better job of like telling everyone what the fuck was going on at any point in the last 450 pages up until she dies and then gets to not tell anyone what's going on. And I do feel like King is almost directly addressing you here at the beginning of this chapter, where Edgar says, "My guess was that Elizabeth had forgotten most of what had happened to her when she was a child, even before the Alzheimer's came along to complicate things, because forgetting isn't always involuntary. Sometimes it's willed."
Yeah, it's true. I think this is certainly an above board thing to do as an element in a story about memory, a story that tells us it is about memory, right? It's about memory in all kinds of different ways, and our relationship with memory is much more complicated than we typically like to admit. We can willfully forget things. We can suppress things, right? So
Yeah.
I think that makes sense. I think it was, to the extent that there's a legitimate confusion. It's like, well, at different times she seemed to be very much aware that there was a supernatural threat relating to art on the island, but I think that was sort of leaking in around the edges of
Yeah.
of a sort of memory blockage that she had built up over the years.
Yeah, yeah, and I think we even talked about maybe, the irony of it was in some of the times when she was perhaps less conscious and less focused, she maybe was able to impart more information than the opposite, which is interesting.
Yeah, I totally think you're right. It's almost like the Alzheimer's was breaking through the plug the plug of memory to
Yeah.
actually allow her to touch those older memories, but perhaps
Mhm.
paradoxically. I like that idea.
This whole conversation about like the voluntary willed forgetting of things is a really interesting one in this story in particular, though, right? Because I think we have to insert this into our overall conception of the story, because we've been told this is a story about memory. We've been told art is memory. These are things the book has explicitly told us. And we know that one of Edgar's frustration or rage points is that he has trouble recall. He can't remember things. He can't remember words, and that drives him crazy. But now we have the willful forgetting of things, the choice to forget, and King goes further with this. He says art is memory remembered, and so willful forgetting becomes then, at least through the story and through Elizabeth, like a willful denial of one's artistic outlet. Like you're going to specifically say, I am not going to embrace this artistic outlet that I have even more
Mm-hmm.
anymore, rather.
Yeah, I think this also connects to King's notion of the importance of honesty in creation, and how, I guess in some sense it's maybe impossible to truly be honest and authentic if you're denying your own memory.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's really interesting because it's like memory is a weird concept. And I guess that's why he's poking at it and exploring it with this book. But I guess what I'm reacting to in this moment is that he's referring to things as memory that I don't usually think of as memory specifically, but technically it is memory. It's like every painting you've seen, for example, like, well, that's a memory now. It was an
Mm-hmm.
experience and now it's a memory. And every thought that you've had in your life, every experience you've had in your life, every insight you've had in your life is now a memory of having had that insight or that experience. And that changes our relationship with those things, that the fact that they are memories and that we have to remember them in
Yeah.
the present moment changes our relationship with those past events. And this is just so much the fabric of our existence as humans that it's like, how's the water, what water type situation. You
Sure.
forget how much of your existence just sort of is swimming in memory.
Yeah.
So I think that's interesting that he's exploring that.
I like that, and I completely agree with you. One thing I do want to pose to you here is an argument that I've kind of been holding, and maybe this is a great place to introduce it, but maybe we can revisit it in the overview episode or something, because I think in my mind, what I've always seen this book as is that, like, this book is called Duma Key, but like the subtitle of this book could possibly be Why I Almost Quit and Why I Didn't.
Mm-hmm.
You know, like I really think there's a lot of stuff going on here, and there's a lot of things King is exploring. But I do think one of the things that's most interesting to me is, as we've talked about many times, King's accident, his near death experience, and the ways in which he came back from that, and it changed and morphed him as a person and his output as a creator. And like so much of this is this idea of, you know, forgetting one's, like, if memory is, as we've been told, an insert for art, than choosing to walk away with this, choosing to turn away from this thing that is incredibly powerful and also incredibly scary. And so like this idea that we're really exploring these concepts of, this is why I think I had this experience and said, I don't want to do this anymore. I want to quit. I think I'm done. I don't think I have anything left to say. And then ultimately why, of course, I could never do that, actually. I don't know. What do you think?
No, I think you're right. I think that's true. I mean, this is maybe the one book out of all the books we've talked about where I don't particularly feel like I'm committing some kind of transgression by saying, I think this book is pretty autobiographical on King's part, because he's talking about an artist and he's being pretty direct about a lot of his comparisons and his insights. Like, these are all just things that are either from On Writing or things that he says in interviews. And it's just like, yeah, this really seems to be the way King thinks about art, the way King thinks about creativity and his own personal relationship with his creativity, the pros and the cons. And so all that being said, yes, I agree with you.
Yeah. And I think this next part fits that idea of course as well, that there's one small problem with trying to deny one's artistic outlet, which is the itch, of course, that damnable itch, which is something that Edgar feels, and I'm sure something that Elizabeth feels, and of course something that King felt. I wonder what his itch is like, and as he's sitting there, I don't think we know this, but I wonder if there ever was a time where, like, he talked about in interviews about how he was going to quit writing, but I wonder if there ever was a time where he like briefly just stopped working on anything, and like how long that lasted.
Yeah, I think so. I may be totally off base, but I thought there was a bit in On Writing where it's like after his accident, he's literally in the hospital at first, and then he's in doped up on meds, and then he's just in too much pain to sit for any real period of time, and effectively can't work for a while, and doesn't particularly feel like working either, I think, because of how fucked up he is. And then at a certain point, he just kind of does. And I wonder what drove him to that moment, though. Like, what did that actually look like?
Well, and that's all true. But I think the thing I was talking about specifically is he said in interviews, he's going to finish up the Dark Tower, and then he's done. Once he finishes the Dark Tower, I'm done. I finished my magnum opus, and I'm done writing. And of course, that never happened, and never was going to happen. But I do wonder if there was a short window of time there where it perhaps did, and how quickly that itch became overwhelming. I don't know.
Yeah, I bet it took about a week. I mean, I'm no Stephen King, and I still, will get inspired by something and like basically have to write a story. Mm-hmm. And usually these stories never even go anywhere. It's almost just like I very much relate to this idea of like the phantom arm starts itching and he has to do the painting, and it's like that I kind of have that where like I have to get the story out, even if it literally just goes into a Google Doc and is never seen by anyone. It's just on my mind until I do that,
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And I'm sure it's a million times worse for Stephen King.
Yeah, especially when you just have this tried and true method of like, once those ideas come, like what you do next, right? Like he knows, like, oh, I get these ideas and I start feeling them out and like, you just get so used to that and just turn that off. It must be impossible.
Yeah.
So Edgar picks up Libet's 80-year-old colored pencils and starts drawing. And honestly, Matt, this part right here is mostly just the book filling Edgar in on a lot of the stuff that we already knew and have learned through the How to Draw a Picture interludes. So like, this should be uninteresting, right? Like it's backfilling information that we, the reader, already know about. There shouldn't be much for you and I to talk about here. And yet there's so much to talk about here, actually. I find this whole thing fascinating. Like, the expectation you probably had going into this chapter was, okay, he's going to pick up the colored pencils, he's going to start drawing, and all of the answers will be revealed. And that's not what we get at all. And yet, it's fascinating.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I structurally, I guess part of me is primed because we talked about the structural way he breaks up the chapters, but also like procedurally, structurally, I wonder how, like, what did his first draft look like versus the final draft? Because one has to wonder if maybe the first draft, we got to this point and we had Edgar go through all of the revelation of Libet's story in one go, end to end. And then maybe later he, when he did his second pass, he realized like that's too much of an info dump, breaks the pacing because we're going into the past too much, and we really should be staying with Edgar in the present. And so maybe he took that material and he sort of scattered it back throughout the story in those how to draw a picture vignettes, so that you get all that information and all that gothic horror, but it's more distributed. And then we don't, again, I think it's pretty critical that we don't really break the flow of the narrative too much to do this. Like, all things considered, it doesn't take that long for Edgar to learn everything that he needs to learn here. And part of it's because we're tapping into the fact that it's like, well, he also knows everything that's in those interludes that we have been reading this whole time. So
just not this version of Edgar. The future version of Edgar does. No, I agree with you. One of the things that I don't know a lot about outside of what he's talked about and on writing is what the editing process looks like for Stephen King. And like how much of these structural things are found in the edit. It'd be a fun question to ask about, like, not just in general, but about like every single book. Like, right, like what did the first draft of Duma Key look like, and how did Duma Key change over the course of the edit? I think is always a really fascinating conversation to have, and it's not the type of thing that I feel like authors are asked very often.
Yeah, I mean, I really, I don't think, is it on writing? Does he talk at all about editing? Because I know he says that he writes a draft and then he puts it in the drawer and doesn't look at it for a month.
Yeah,
but it's like, okay, but then what? Like, do you break out a red pencil? Do you literally just like start writing it again? Like, it could be anything in there. He
does talk about it a little bit. He does read it and mark it up, and then he has like his group of like first readers, including his wife, that go through it and give him notes, and then like it goes from there. But it's very vague and broad the way he talks about the editing revisioning process.
Yeah, I'm very curious about this because I feel like it's very easy for me to run out a rough draft of something. It's a totally different story to edit it. So I feel like authors in general don't like to talk about it, or they don't tend to talk about it, I guess is more accurate. Maybe people just don't ask them enough detailed questions about like, no, but really, what does your edit look like? Like, how much time do you spend editing versus how much time do you spend writing? Stuff like that.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's just the least sexy part of the process, right? Like, I think most writers you will interview say that the revisions and editing phase is the worst one. Like to put it in terms of this story, right? It's like the actual first draft of a story is often perhaps very much akin to Edgar channeling some great power to have like a weird night paint session that all just happens in a blur. The difference is that you don't get this beautiful, perfect finished product in the morning. You get something that has potential but needs a lot of just boring work to get it to a state where it's ready, and that it's not sexy, it's not fun to talk about, it's often arduous and time consuming. And so I don't think editors, or I don't think writers like it very often. And then there's the complicated nature of like how much is his own personal editing versus the editors through his publisher, and that whole thing.
Yeah, I think this is I think this has been on my mind. I don't feel like this is a tangent, because it's like there's a tension between the idea that you're channeling some cosmic muse to create these works of art, and the simple fact that we know that's not really how it is, because you put it in a drawer, then you look at it later and you're like, oh God, what was I thinking? And you make all these changes and revisions, and every single author does that, right? So like, can the muse have a hand in the editorial process too? Of course it can. We're being metaphorical, right? But I'm like, okay, but really though, I'm if I ever get a chance to ask these questions, I'll ask some very unsexy questions about editing, because this is genuinely where a lot of my questions lie. Like, I feel like I understand a lot of this process, but that's what I don't understand. Like, I might even, if I had the chance, literally ask like, hey, the how to paint it, the how to draw a picture sections, at what point in the process were those introduced? Because
Mhm.
I can see a structural purpose for them, but I don't know that that purpose would have been evident until you kind of were looking at the whole book and realized that it needed that connective tissue, just for
Yeah,
example.
especially from a pantser seat of a pants writer
Hmm.
like King that does an outline, and it's like, yeah, those kind of structural movements and stuff. Like, it's certainly possible that he had that idea in mind when he sat down to write the book, but the function of it doesn't reveal itself until you have a completed product. So yeah, I agree. It really interesting stuff for us, probably less interesting for other people out there. But I agree. I've been thinking about editing a lot lately.
Yeah. Anyway, I don't know why it's hitting me so hard this week, but it's really on my mind this week.
Yeah,
Anyway.
yeah. So the interesting thing about the how to draw a picture sections, Matt, like talking back more about why this part works, even though it's retelling us information. Until recently, those sections contained so little Edgar in them. Now the ones recently have contained quite a bit more Edgar. But here, as Edgar looks at the first picture, a little Elizabeth drew, which is just a line on a paper, which he later realizes is the horizon, her first attempt to draw the horizon, which is basically the same thing he first drew. And he connects it back to this idea of Libet drawing herself back into the world. And we knew this, right? This was a thing that we knew that she did, that she drew, that's what the first how to draw a picture section said. She drew herself back into the world. But I think there is something different about seeing this not through a 4 years removed Edgar looking back and writing about it, but seeing this through the eyes of the Edgar of right now, making this connection that you and I noticed immediately between everything that happened to Elizabeth and everything that happened to Edgar and how they're the same. I think it just hits a little bit different when you get to see that play out this way. I don't know. What do you think?
Yeah. Seeing him, I think what's hitting different, maybe specifically, is him realizing that kinship with
Yeah.
Elizabeth.
Yeah.
Because before that, yes, we knew that, but seeing him learn that makes him realize the connection and the resonance there. It almost makes it sadder that she died without him maybe fully realizing how similar they were.
Yeah. That's true. I mean, I think she knew, right? I
Mm-hmm.
think Elizabeth knew, and that's why she felt this kinship with him.
Yeah,
Even if he didn't fully comprehend that. Yeah, I
true.
do like the writing here, though. Just describing what it's like to create, though. It was like being given a tongue when you had been mute, and more, better. It was like being given back your memory, and a person's memory is everything, really. Memory is identity. It's you. Even from the first line, that incredibly brave first line meant to show where the gulf met the sky, she had understood that seeing and memory were interchangeable and had set out to mend herself. Just beautiful, beautiful stuff. I love it so much.
Yeah, and I mean, like, very sort of rich and philosophically interesting to think about what it means to say seeing and memory were interchangeable.
Yeah.
Um, I could say so many things about that, right? Because
Yeah, I mean, you talked about it already, right? This idea that the second you view something, that it becomes a memory, right?
Yeah.
Like that's the you really break your head thinking about these things, but everything that's happening to you right now is immediately being deposited in your memory. And because you can't ponder something in real time, you're pondering the memory of
yeah. I know it's a thing we never think about. And then conversely, as soon as you remember something, I know people have different degrees of being visual, right? But as soon as you remember something, to some degree, you see it again in your mind's eye.
Yeah.
To whatever degree you can accurately remember it, at least, or not accurately, as the case may be. We remember things wrong without realizing it.
Sure.
But or you can imagine something, which is to remember something that never happened. But then once you've imagined it, now it's a memory, right? So it's really interesting. There's another thing I wanted to say about this, by the way, is like, just I've always kind of wondered, like, okay, well, I understand Ed, you're getting really angry when he loses a word, when he's trying to say something, like it's relatable.
Yeah.
But I was always like, well, but what are we doing in a larger sense? How is that fitting into what we're saying about this character? And I feel like this may be kind of the moment where that question is answered, because it's not just about losing the word and the frustration of that. It's about losing identity. It's about losing himself.
Yeah.
And the, the anger and the fear on some level, I think, the sense of loss of that. So connecting that idea in with this idea that memory is identity, I think was powerful for me.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, especially since the accident, like he lost part of himself, both physically and mentally, right? And so, yeah, this idea of, and this book has been a lot about like this idea of rediscovering who you are. That version of you ceased to exist, and this is a new version now. But who is that version? And I don't know. And it's a version that can't remember things, and so that doesn't help him define who that person is. Yeah, it all ties together really well, I think.
Yep.
To go back a bit, because the paragraph I just read was actually in response to another idea that this whole thing brings up, but I wanted to talk about that part first. But this part is when Edgar is talking about his interview with Mary Eyre and the question she asks about what it's like to be good at something like this that's so mysterious and beautiful. And I think this is really interesting. I'm going to read it and we can talk about it a little bit here. She said, discovering in my middle age that I could paint with the best of them must have been like having someone give me the keys to a souped up muscle car, a Roadrunner or a GTO. I said, yes, it was like that. At another point, she said it must have been like having someone give me the keys to a fully furnished house, a mansion, really. I said, yes, like that too. And if she had gone on, said it must have been like inheriting 1 million shares of Microsoft stock or being elected ruler for life of some oil-rich and peaceful emirate in the Mideast, I would have said, yeah, sure, you bet, to soothe her, because those questions were about her. I could see the longing look in her eyes when she asked them. They were the eyes of a kid who knows the closest she's ever going to get to realizing her dream of the high trapeze is sitting on the bleachers at the Saturday matinee performance. She was a critic. A lot of critics who aren't called to do what they write about grow jealous and mean and small in their disappointment. Mary wasn't like that. So a lot to talk about there, Matt.
Yeah.
There's a few things I want to mention. I think we'll
Right.
start with just the idea of that constant question people get, right?
Yeah.
Like,
What's it like to be such a talented and prolific writer, Mr. King?
Yeah.
Yeah.
It must be like this. It must be like this. It must be like this. All coming from people who, you see in some people's eyes that you relate to them. Like you all have this understanding, like Elizabeth and Edgar have in each other. But some people will never understand what that's like, and you can't really explain it to them.
Yeah. Well, I mean, the funny thing is, on the one hand, King's probably very much used to being Stephen King at this point, and so if you ask him, like, what is it like? It's just the thing that I do, man. I doubt that it feels particularly special. I mean, on some level, I'm sure that he gets a ton of joy out of it, obviously, like as we've talked about, but also it is just the thing that he's been doing day in, day out for his entire life. So is it like winning it, the lottery? It's like, probably not really. I mean, probably not like winning the lottery at all, because that's by definition is sort of transient joy. And people always imagine, I think people always imagine that like the thing that they want that they don't have is going to feel, it would feel so awesome. It would be so awesome if I was that, or if I had that. And it's like, that's not the way neurology works. Like you feel good for like a second, and then you're just like, yep, this is normal now. This is my life now.
Yeah.
So
yeah, and I don't think it's an accident that all of the comparison points here from Mary were material, right? Like it must be like having the keys to this really awesome car, or like having a super rich mansion, or like being a ruler of some incredibly rich nation, like it's all material. It's all defined by stuff. And basically what this whole thing is saying is, no, it's not like that. It's like breathing. It's like, it's being given a voice that you didn't have before. It's intangible. And I think that's one of the things, like we've talked about it before on the show, is like King could have stopped writing 30-40 years ago and been one of the richest, most successful authors of all time, right? Like he monetarily Like, he's got the GTO, he's got the Microsoft stock, he's got the fully furnished house. He has all these things, but that's not what this is. That's not, and it never was. I mean, that stuff's nice, sure, but it was always about this concept of being given a tongue when you had been mute and more better. That's always what it was, and that's why, again, like why I almost quit, and then why I decided not to. Right?
Yeah, I like that. It's more like it's a relief from a kind of suffering than it is any kind of windfall, right?
Yeah.
It's a reprieve.
Yeah, and it's it's scary too. That I love this because, like, yeah, people like me who, I am not a writer in this paradigm of this paragraph we just read. I'm the critic who is not called to do what I write about. That is me, right? Like, and I have no illusions of that, and I'm not upset about it. But like it looks like, man, the ability to do that must be incredible. And as you said, the grass is always greener, right? It's like, that's not how it works, though. It's like, it's not this thing that King talks about or thinks about on a regular basis of like, man, it's so nice to be able to do these things that I do. It's just his life.
Yeah, right. I mean, I think the funny thing is, like, the farther you are away from an artistic medium, the more magical it looks like, and thus you assume that the person doing it must just like be magically emitting it somehow.
Yeah.
But like I'm trying to connect this idea. Like, I know one person who is like a professional visual artist, and she never seems happy with anything she makes. She always is like so detail oriented and critical, even though the thing that she's made, it's like, yeah, I could never do that. And that's not even me being like, it's just like, I just factually, that's just so far beyond my abilities. And all she is critical of it. And it's like, yeah, like that. And probably all she sees when she looks at her own stuff is all the little mistakes that you or I wouldn't notice at all.
Yeah.
And that's, I think, a lot more what it feels like to be an artist of any kind, is you don't even see what other people see when they look at your creation, actually.
Yeah. And to go back to the editing conversation, we don't see the work that went into this. We just see the finished product. So like, it looks magical and powerful and spontaneous and wonderful, but this was a lot of blood, sweat, and tears. It was a lot of internalizing and often self-doubt and struggle to get this thing. But we don't see any of that. We just see the nice, pretty finished product.
Yep.
So from here, we see a slightly different angle on the story we already know. We see Little Libbet drawing, experimenting, Percy coming to her through a doll, influencing her, testing her, the Alice Storm, the China doll, Fair Salvage. Matt, we don't get all of our answers here. And in fact, the key ones, how did Elizabeth put Percy to sleep last time and how can they do it again now, aren't answers. And I guess the question I have for you here now is that frustrating for you to read? Like, you're going to have to wait clearly until next week to get the answers to these big, big questions. And is it frustrating to you that we set this up as the answers chapter and then didn't deliver?
Not particularly. If I had negative emotions this week, it was more from all of the people dying.
Fair.
I wouldn't say frustrating. I think there's pleasure in the unspooling of a story, and I rarely feel like I want it to go faster. Personally, King chastises us at the end of the Dark Tower to not munch our way through the pages to the ending, right? And I while I did read the ending of the Dark Tower, of course, I think I agree with him. I like deeply just sort of often want a story to keep going rather than to rush to the answers. So I did not actually mind that we didn't fully get our answers this week. I was okay with that.
Okay, good. Something else I want to talk to you about here, Matt. King is doing something really clever here. So I'll read this paragraph and we can talk about it a little bit. I added Elizabeth to the picture of diving daddy, standing up to her chubby knees in the water, Novine tucked under her arm. Libbet almost could have been the doll girl in the sketch Ilsa had demanded, the one I had titled The End of the Game. So you see what King's doing here, right, Matt? You see? He's reminding us, the reader, that Ilsa took a picture of his home. called The End of the Game. Now, this is a fact that's going to come into play in a big way in the upcoming chapters. And speaking of editing, right, this is the type of thing where like it's a very clever trick we're doing here, where we are reminding the reader of something that is going to matter for them in just a little bit. And I do think, by the way, I think he wants us to remember the picture he gave to Ilsa before Edgar remembers it. Like it feels like the structure of the story is set up to where like we're reading the pages going, no, Edgar, you forgot about that one. Oh my God. And like that realization, I think that's the effect he wants out of you. And so like this clever thing where if you're reading the book normally, like a normal person, not like we're doing it, you might have forgotten. You might have just let it slip your mind that when Ilsa came to visit him over the holidays, he drew her a picture. She really liked it and demanded to take it, and he acquiesced because he can't say no to her. And he's kind of planting that seed of reminder in your brain, kind of hidden here. Like it's not the focal point of the sentence. It might be the type of thing that reading you only pick up on subconsciously, but it just pings in your brain, and you remind yourself about this picture, and then everything else that happened gets to play, and the recall, I think, is there faster, versus if he didn't put this there, you might still have that recall, but it might take longer, or it might not be there at all. I don't know. I think this is really cool.
Yeah, you're totally right. I mean, there's a huge subtlety to this where I don't know. It must take a ton of experience. This is a skill I don't think I have as a writer, is like how much is too much versus how much is not enough.
Yeah.
Because you do, like you said, you want to prime the reader, but you don't necessarily at this point want to be like the one I had titled The End of the Game, the one with the tennis balls that I had given to Ilsa.
Mm-hmm.
That's, you're like, oh.
Like it like almost like the one she had taken home with her back to her house that is now at her apartment. Yeah, right. like he doesn't even say he gives it to her. Like just the sketch that Ilsa had demanded, right? That almost implies that she has it, but doesn't directly say she has the sketch. You know?
Right,
yeah, it's all very, very clever.
Right. So
Edgar, finishing his work, realizes that he doesn't have all the answers, but he feels like he has enough of them. The rest will be found at the south end of the key in the original Heron's Roost, when they're planning on going the next morning. He goes downstairs and sees Percy's ship of the dead is just there.
It's just
floating.
It's just real and there outside of the house. Yeah.
Yeah. He slaps himself in the face several times to try to like test, oh, I'm dreaming, I'm imagining. No, it doesn't go away. It's still there. It in fact, we are led to believe it is just actually literally there.
Yeah.
And I think to confirm that, there's a man in his kitchen.
yeah. There's that's the thing. I'm still personally not sure how really actually there it really is, because it's like, okay, but then where did it go afterward? But yes, I mean, the man in his kitchen does appear to be physically actually there, and just seems to be an undead guy and not a apparition.
Yeah, I mean, he manacles his arm, so he's definitely physically there for sure. Which he also gets candlesticked in the head. So yeah, the ghost is real and tangible.
Yeah, the ghost is real and tangible, and if it's like, well, did the boat bring him, or it's really. Well, yeah, I admit I just don't know. I just have no idea if the boat is like an important. I don't know what the boat is.
Wireman sees it, man. It's just the boat of the dead. It's real. It's just the dead boat.
Yeah. Okay. It's just the dead boat.
I will say, like, you know, we've talked before, and I've mentioned that I don't get scared very much reading these days. Like even reading a bunch of horror, it takes a lot to scare me. But man, I read this part of the book at like 1:30 a.m. laying in bed the other night, and there was definitely a manacled man in the corner of my room waiting for me, for sure. And I was just waiting for him to go say, "Time to go, Scott."
Yeah.
It was like I got creeped out. I had trouble falling asleep that night, so this worked on me for sure.
Yeah. I think it maybe unsettled me a bit even, and I was probably not reading it in the middle of the night. It's a great moment because it comes out of nowhere. You don't expect this escalation in this moment. And what was it going to do with him? You know, I really don't quite.
It was gonna put a manacle on him and drag him to the real dead ship out in the water, Matt.
Right. Maybe. I mean, yes. I think what I'm really asking, the question underneath that question is like, what does Percy really want with him exactly? Does she want him? Like, does she want him to keep making pictures for her? Or is that a means to an end? And that end is some specific thing that she needs him to do, or something she wants from him?
Yeah, that's a fair question.
That's the big mystery. And it's taken some time for that question to come into focus, I think. But I have been wondering at the edges of that question for a while, like what does it want from him, basically, is the question that I've been asking myself. We still don't know, and I guess we'll know next week.
Sure. All right. So fortunately, Matt, Wireman comes to Edgar's rescue in the nick of time, and he beans Mr. Zombie in the head with the silver candlestick. So I guess it really was silver, right? It's just it's a weakness of vampires and werewolves and art zombies.
Yeah. Or, if you have faith in the totem, doesn't really matter what's in the totem.
There you go. I like it. So they head back and fill Jack in on everything, and he just is kind of like, yeah, sure. I love this quote. I had to remind myself that he had been raised on shows like The X-Files and Lost. Besides, it fit with what he'd been told earlier. The book doesn't have time to like put efforts to having a character buy into this stuff at this point. The book's almost over. It's just like, yeah, okay, we're gonna do it.
Yeah. I don't mind this so much because I feel like Jack has been on the periphery of supernatural stuff enough that it's like he's probably struggled with it in the background somewhat.
Yeah. Of course, now that Lost is textually part of the greater Stephen King universe, I think we have to do a podcast on it.
Yeah, that's how that works. Yeah.
I know you're being a little facetious, but yes, it is.
I mean, aren't there like there's tons of overt Stephen King references in Lost, right? So I think Lost is as canonical as Castle Rock is, really, if you think about it.
I mean, are you telling me after Castle Rock we're doing it?
Oh, wow. You have an amazing capacity for stretching my words there. That's just
I think really, that's what you just, I mean, that's what I heard.
Really something. It's remarkable.
God. I'm so excited about this. Everyone, Matt did it. He said it. We're doing it.
I want you Lost as my lawyer if I'm ever in trouble. So what you're saying is... I would like to read
a direct message I got from Matt, just real quick here, in the interest of full disclosure.
Is this going to be lightly edited direct message?
No, of course not. Hold on, I have to scroll up through all of our talking about Elden Ring. This is taking a lot longer to scroll through. Essentially, Matt said that the series finale of Lost is perfect and excellent, and he agrees to do a show on it.
I mean, that's not exactly what I remember saying, but if you say so, I certainly am not going to scroll up past all that Elden Ring talk.
I mean, it's right here. Here it is. Yep. Anyway, the important information we learn here, Matt, and the part where you get to kind of pat yourself on the back is Edgar seems pretty convinced that this zombie that was at his house belonged to Emery Paulson, who happens to be Adriana Eastlake's eloped husband. So you had mentioned last week that you kind of felt that they just disappeared. And you had almost talked yourself out of it, by the way. I had to kind of like steer you back to your original correct assumption, but you were absolutely right. These characters just kind of disappeared, and we're led to believe here that they came back to help search for the twins when they disappeared and disappeared themselves. And here's proof positive of that.
Yeah, I mean, it just seemed like you don't even include the element of a mysterious elopement in the first place if you're not going to do something with that and put it to use in your story.
Yep. I agree. So, as the three men ponder what to do next, Edgar realizes that the paintings themselves are dangerous, especially the Girl on Ship series, and they're about to be shipped all around the country. So, Matt, as we move on to this oh my god, the paintings can kill section of the story, I do want to ask you a question. This is something I was thinking about at the time, and now we finally get to talk about it. Elizabeth Eastlake originally demanded that that the paintings get off the key, right? Like that you cannot leave all these paintings on Duma Key. It's dangerous if you do that, especially the Girl and Ship series. Like especially those, get them off, spread them out, get them as far away from this place and each other as possible. So my question for you is, was this just a mistake or a misunderstanding, that part of maybe her memory block of this whole thing, you know, thought that would work or be effective, and actually what it is just increasing Percy's range by a whole lot? Or was this a malevolent move by Percy, kind of pushing her influence on Elizabeth? I go back to those moments that we called out when we got to them, that it seemed like Elizabeth was like briefly possessed or something. Now whether that was just the Alzheimer's working on her, or we're using possessed in the literal sense. So I'm curious what your take on this is.
So yeah, I may be misremembering, but I feel like when she told him that, there wasn't really any indication that I can recall that she was under any kind of influence.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I could be wrong. My theory is that as far as Elizabeth's personal story goes, her experience of all of this is that her artwork stayed on the island and led to a bunch of people being tormented and killed. And then she incorrectly deduced from this, like, because the island is the nexus of Percy's power, that the power would fall off as the art got further away from the island, which is wrong, as we know. And but so perhaps she thought that the art needed to be concentrated to work because she observed Percy's power becoming stronger over time as she accumulated artwork. And thought, okay, the power must be getting stronger because I'm creating more and more of these artworks. And it's like, no, in reality, maybe it was just Libet's power that was growing stronger over time, and that led it to appear as though Percy was becoming stronger over time. And also, like, I think maybe the reason why I'm sort of resisting the idea that it was enemy action is that, like, if we really think about it on the level of metaphor or theme, like, why on earth would art become less powerful as it becomes more distant from its source? Like, that doesn't make sense as a thematic idea. And usually, if you're gonna do magic, you make the magic work in a way that resonates with whatever message you're trying to do. So anyway, I guess it's possible that this is Percy's subterfuge. So it's always possible. Anything's possible. But I think I just like the idea better that Elizabeth just made a mistake. Of course, we could, Percy could just tell us next week, it was me all along.
Sure.
But I don't know. I feel I'm going to put a line in the sand here and say I don't think so. I think Elizabeth was just mistaken.
Yeah, I think all your points make a lot of sense, and I think that argument holds a lot of water with me. I agree. We'll see whether that it's confirmed or not. But just something that I like in the back of my mind, I was always like wondering if you were thinking these things, and I didn't want to ask directly until this point, because I didn't want to push you or influence you one way or the other. But yeah, I think you make a lot of sense there. I especially like the idea of just bringing it back to the high level, the metaphorical level of I don't think that really works with what we're doing with art in the story.
Yeah, like the way the magic of the evil art works, it's like I just like better the idea that it's I don't know. It's
no, I get you.
It's a fun idea though.
Yeah. So Edgar starts frantically dialing, first the Scoto, telling them to hold shipment on all his paintings for a few days. Then to Tom, he gets his answering machine, but the message on the answering machine has been changed, Matt. And it's changed to Tom informing Edgar that he's dead, and he's going to go kill Pam now too. Edgar calls Pam and finds out that Tom is indeed dead, and he crashed his car right into a retaining wall at 70 miles an hour. No brakes, no stopping. Suicide, it looks like, but Edgar knows different. He saves Pam's life by taking himself out. Well, wow, what a you said this is a section of escalation, and I think you're right here, right? Like this is like, oh shit, people are dying now.
Yeah. I found this one to be weirdly moving because we put all this effort into saving Tom. There was a whole like arc. There was the Save Tom arc of the book. It's always moving when a character makes this kind of sacrifice, and there's something about the very lack of grandiosity of the sacrifice that makes it hit harder for me somehow.
Yeah, it's also like most people are going to just chalk it up to the suicidal guy committed suicide. And there's something really sad about that, right?
Yeah.
Like, incredibly like noble of him to do this. You know, he realizes that he's lost control and he's somehow heading to kill Pam and decides the only way to prevent that is to do this. And I agree.
And he's able to actually do that.
Mm-hmm.
A comment on this is just, it's interesting how much of this book is sort of like about futility, because we spent all this time saving Tom, and then Tom literally dies by suicide.
Mm-hmm.
And we're about to spend a bunch of effort saving Ilsa, and we know what happens there. And it's just interesting on the level of theme. I would say that like no matter your best efforts, everything it all amounts to nothing basically. Like it's a very dismal sort of story in that regard.
Yeah, I mean, I don't disagree. I mean, I think another way of framing that is just like the real tragedies of our life are ones that we can't prevent or stop. That they're going to happen no matter what. Like I don't know, like once again, to go back to the Stephen King accident comparison, like he wrote this entire Dark Tower section, which is making his character save his life from this van, to give meaning to this event that had no meaning. And you know, we compare that to the, like, no one was there to save Edgar, but no one was ever going to be. And it's like futility, yes, but also just like that's life sometimes. Like these things just happen, and they're not ever in a way that anyone could reasonably predict.
Yeah, I guess you're right. Yeah, I'm still metabolizing, and I won't know until we finish the book. Like, what are we ultimately saying about the nature of, because it's not just inevitability. It's not just Ka. It's all of the struggle is pointless. Like we watch the struggle happen, and then the bad thing happens anyway. I think that's the specific element that I'm reacting to here. I mean, everything you just said is right. It's just we spent a lot of time trying to do a thing, and we thought we'd succeeded. I'm talking about two things. I'm talking about both Ilsa and Tom. Put a lot of energy into saving these people. We think we've succeeded, and then it's ripped away from us in both cases.
Yeah.
And that feels important and intentional.
Yeah. I agree, and you've given me a lot to think about here. So let's carry on, and we'll maybe keep coming back to this, I think.
All right.
So we quickly get a recount here of who bought what. Most of the paintings were too expensive for Edgar's family and friends to buy, but the sketches were the right price, and several of them were purchased. So there's a danger here.
Yeah. I mean, it made me really anxious. Like I started getting really anxious around this point, because like even though I knew what would happen, well, actually no, that's not true. I knew that Ilsa's going to die, but he's making it much more complex than just like, oh, we got to save Ilsa. It's like there's all these balls in the air, and we got to call these people. We don't know who we're going to save and who's going to die, and kind of anything could happen. It successfully got to me. Actually, made me like really invested in like, okay, shit, like we gotta lock this down. Yeah,
no, I agree. It's really good. We learned that Rick, Lenny's boyfriend bought a sketch, but they're going to have it shipped to Paris, so it's not with them, so they're okay. We learned that Cayman and Bozeman both bought sketches, and they do have them on it. He tells Pam she's got to call them and make sure they're okay and ask them to burn it immediately. Pam asks about his daughters, and Edgar assures her that they'll be okay. He says specifically, if they didn't take any pictures with them, they'll be fine. And of course, if you were paying attention, we already know right here, right in this moment, the error that Edgar has made. And like I said a little bit ago, I believe strongly that this is King doing this on purpose. That like he wants you right now to go, oh fuck.
Yeah.
This is how it happens. This is what he's forgotten. And this is, talking again about why tell us that that Ilsa's gonna die before she does. Why do that? The whole discussion question we have at the end of the show about this. In this moment, the why is because knowing it and then getting to see the way it's gonna happen before it happens is just riveting in this very specific kind of way.
Yeah, it changes your whole experience of reading this section because that's what's on your mind, right?
Yeah. So one thing brought up here that I wanted to highlight briefly, so maybe we can pick at it a little bit, is this idea that Elizabeth's incredible paintings that she was doing, this is young Elizabeth, got boring very quickly, both to herself and to others around her. And this is when then she started to experiment. And it was during this experimental phase that Percy found her. And the question is, what are we saying with that? What are we trying to say with that idea that it is the experimental phase of the creation of art that brings this destructive force upon her and the island?
I think it might just have to do with the dangers of opening yourself up to whatever muse might be happening by or whatever. I think, I don't know how seriously to take this, honestly, but it's like if you let yourself be pushed and pulled around by forces that you're not really taking seriously, then maybe that can put you in a bad spot. I don't know that this I'm I'm sort of dancing around saying, is this autobiographical too? Is there are there muses that maybe Stephen King followed at different times that he later was like, man, that was a mistake. Like I like that was just a source of bad mojo that I was working on. And I don't literally mean a magical thing. I just mean whatever element of the human experience he was tuning into. Maybe he was like, that was just bad for me, and it made a book that I'm not happy with now. And nobody died. But at the same time, maybe it was a mistake. Maybe he regrets it. I don't know. It's interesting to consider, at least.
I mean, you're so right, because that's the thing I want to do, and I don't want to take it too seriously, because at the end of the day, this is a gothic horror novel, and like, just because a character in a gothic horror novel dies, which is a thing that characters in gothic horror novels do all the time, does not mean that King is somehow extending his metaphor to mean it is dangerous and destructive and violent to experiment in your art. Like, that's not like there's a temptation here to do what we've been doing this entire book, which is like relate what Edgar is doing with his artwork to what King is doing with his artwork, and drawing a specific conclusion from that, which is this idea that like Edgar, paints these paintings and they get his fucking daughter killed. That's what happens. That's what happens in the story. Is King saying his form of content, I guess, for lack of a better phrase, is ultimately violent and destructive? No, I don't think so. But that's there, certainly, right?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, look, okay, I'm going to say the thing that's on my mind, and I think this is probably stupid, but I'm going to say it anyway because why not? I'm thinking about Rage, as a book, the book Rage that he wrote, and
the
how
one
he
that
like
he's not like no longer in circulation.
Yeah, like disavowed basically. And it's like, maybe he thinks of that as, he was experimenting, and he experimented and went to a very, very, very dark place. And what came out of it was something that in retrospect, he's like, shouldn't have written this. That nothing good came of that. Right. And I that to me feels like such a stretch that I almost just wanted to say it, and I don't really think that's true, but it was what I was thinking about as I was mulling over this idea of like what are the dangers of experimentation really? I mean, are we meant to take this seriously, or like you said, is it just like it's a gothic horror novel? Of course it's dangerous to experiment because there's demons, because it's not
Yeah.
real.
Yeah, no, but I like that though. I like that as part of a conversation about like what is the influence of art. You know, like in the 90s, this was a conversation that happened continuously. You know, like you know, kids shot up Columbine High School, and we blamed the music they listened to. We blamed the books that they read. I mean, the reason that Rage was removed out of print is because they found it in the locker of a kid who shot up his school.
Mm-hmm.
And King learned that, and then like felt some level of responsibility for it, and said, whether fair or not, and said, okay, I'm going to do what I can, and what I can is remove this book from circulation.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, I mean, as maybe not a definitive conclusion of, but a conversation of, you know, art is powerful. Like we admit it's powerful, and I think we, and when I say we, I mean myself here, like kind of scoff at the idea that, like, you know, there's this constant idea out there is like violent movies and video games make people violent, and my response to that has always been like, don't be ridiculous. But like, we do acknowledge that art is very, very powerful, right? Like it has a great ability to affect people emotionally, to get people to think about things they've never thought about before, to see things like the you know, movies are empathy, as Ebert said, and I think the same is true with books and any kind of stories that allow you to see from someone else's perspective, that like can change you. They can change you, right? And so while I resist this idea that like a book or a movie or a video game by itself is going to make you pick up a gun and do violent things, like it's powerful, and it is. And maybe instead of us trying to come to a definitive conclusion on this, we could just simply say that King is just exploring that general idea of that this thing is beautiful and wonderful and powerful, and it also has this other side to it, and we don't like to talk about that side as much, and we're not sure how much that side actually matters or not, but it's there.
Yeah, it's funny. We as a society are very two-faced about this question, because we totally admit that propagandistic art can change minds and influence people and make people behave a certain way, and then we totally turn around and say, no, it's totally not possible that art could have influenced this particular person, because that would mean that the art that I consume is a problem in some way.
Yeah, because I like that art, and I don't want it to go away. Yeah,
exactly. When it actually, the take that you should always have is, yes, it is dangerous, but it's valuable to a free society that we be allowed to consume things that are dangerous to us. Mm-hmm. And that's just a risk that we take, that which is a harder argument to defend, but is actually the correct one. So
no, I agree. Yeah. I mean, and maybe, I don't know, maybe that's the conclusion of this novel, or maybe that's what King was thinking about. I like this, because this does, I was struggling with this idea, right? I was like, what are we saying here? And perhaps the mistake we're making is we don't have to be saying one specific conclusive thing. We could just be I'm just gonna phrase it the worst possible way, just asking questions, man.
Yeah, that's me, man. I'm always just asking questions.
Anyway, so they briefly ponder what Percy and her ship are, and the book, Matt, name drops Persephone, which, good job, Matt. That was remarkably, you made that from PER. You went to Persephone.
You know, I don't normally get these predictions, but doing pretty good today.
So I mean, they basically say, yeah, sure, it could be Persephone, but Edgar kind of feels like it was something, you know, far older and more mysterious than just a Greek goddess, something perhaps from the Prim. You know, this is this we get into Dark Tower shit here, right?
Yeah. I mean, I feel like I don't want to be reductive, because it makes it seem like all of King's monsters are really the same monster, but it is sort of a blank vampire. It is a creativity or art vampire from the Prim, probably, right? Mm-hmm. Something old and powerful, kind of reminds you of it. where it takes on a glamour, and its true nature is something sort of difficult to understand. But that kind of seems like what we're looking at here.
Do you think like it and Percy and why am I blanking on the one from Dark Tower?
Dandelo.
Yeah, Dandelo all get in a room and they're like, all right, I'm gonna do fear, I'm gonna do laughter. What are you gonna do? Art.
Yeah.
And they're like, really? Like, I can just see them totally making fun of her.
Yeah, I can see them being like, that sounds way harder than fear. I think I'm going to have a much easier time than you.
Yeah. We'll meet up here in a couple centuries and see how we're all doing.
Yeah.
So Edgar reasons that when Elizabeth realized what was going on, she tried to draw Percy out of existence by drawing her and then erasing her, pulling a Patrick Danville, if you will. Hey, there's a name that I was intentionally not mentioning until this moment in the book, Matt.
So that I wouldn't say, why don't they just erase her?
It doesn't work, though. We're told, or at least Edgar believes, and it angers Percy enough that she sends the big boy after Elizabeth's sisters. But I mean, there is a Danville connection here, right? I mean, that again, I was kind of intentionally not mentioning this, but it's here.
Yeah, the Danville connection was always kind of halfway in my mind, but not really immediately on my mind, because there's like an obvious way in which it's relevant, where it's like, okay, magic power to sort of draw things and then they happen. But it's like I didn't really think Patrick Danville was gonna like show up, or that it was gonna really like matter. So I wasn't thinking too much about Patrick Danville.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, and I agree. Like it's just like a one-off. Hey, this is very Danville-esque, isn't it?
Yeah.
And yeah, Patrick Danville successfully erased his red monster.
Yeah, he did.
Elizabeth, not so much.
Yeah, the erasing trick worked for him, but not for Elizabeth. Interestingly, I think that's I don't know what to make of that. I guess it's also just while we're talking about Danville, I was thinking about the fact that he also is like trapped. He's like the prisoner of this entity.
True.
This energy siphoning entity. So it's like, once again, you have a person who's very talented at visual arts, who has been obviously in a very different context, but essentially made prisoner of this energy vampire of some kind, right? I wonder if that's meant to say something about the kinds of people who these entities are attracted to, or who they like to prey on.
Yeah, good question. I don't know.
Yeah.
So Pam calls with more bad news. She called Illy, and she seems fine, but just a little bit tired. But Cayman apparently had a heart attack on his way back from Florida and has passed away. They say basically it could or could not be related to the picture. It could have just been a heart attack. He was a large man. But
it was the picture.
Yeah, I mean, it was 100% the big like for sure it was the picture.
Yeah.
So our chapter ends with Edgar heading back to Big Pink after they make plans to head to the south end of the island in the morning, and that wraps up our first chapter of 3 tonight. Matt, we're gonna have to speed this up a little.
Have to pick up the pace. Okay, then I'll refrain from making my comment where I was going to blame Pam for Ilsa's death.
Oh boy. I mean, Edgar does enough of that for us, right? Edgar, when he calls Ilsa, he's like, "How did she not notice this?"
Good point.
How did she not notice this?
Because she doesn't love her daughter enough.
Yeah, that's how we measure love, and noticing when they're being haunted by evil paintings.
Gotta have a yardstick. That's my yardstick of love.
I mean, it is absolutely true that like Edgar is more in tuned with Ilsa than her mother is, for sure.
Yeah, right.
All right, let's move on to our first and only How to Draw a Picture interlude of the week. This is How to Draw a Picture 9. Remember, Matt, a couple of weeks ago when I noted that these interludes were shifting a little bit, that it was less about Elizabeth and Edgar was kind of becoming more and more part of the interludes? Well, this one here is not even about Elizabeth at all, Matt. This one is totally about Edgar and Ilsa, of course. The opening lines of it are, "Look for the picture inside the picture. It's not always easy to see, but it's always there. and if you miss it, you can miss the world. I love that. Everything has a meaning underneath the meaning, right? That's how storytelling works.
Yeah.
That's how most things work. That's how King works, I think.
Yeah, I think, good storytelling for sure. Yeah.
I'm sorry to mention this because I don't want to call the person out. I hope they're not a listener, but I was reading either the Dark Tower or the Stephen King subreddit today, and I was asking a question about the short story The Boogeyman that we covered months ago, and they're like, I don't understand what's going on here. Like, who's the boogeyman? What is it real? What does this mean? I don't get the story. And someone response was basically just like, it's just a boogeyman. This was before Stephen King did that whole like blah 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 as a metaphor for blah 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 thing. And I was just like, no.
Are you serious?
It can be a real boogeyman and still also be a metaphor, which is exactly what it is in that story. But yeah, I hope that person's not a listener. I just thought they were wrong. It's like, he was always doing that thing. He's always been doing this thing where there's a picture with inside the picture. There's meaning with inside the meaning. That has always been the case. It always will be the case, especially with Stephen King.
Yeah, I mean, not only are artists always putting metaphor into their work, but also, even if they're not, you can still find some.
Yep. If it's not conscious, it's still there. And even if an artist, like, even if he did just write a story about a boogeyman, like, the reader puts meaning into the work, right? Like, so we do. Yeah,
exactly.
So, all right, Matt, in this interlude, we're starting to sprint towards Ilsa's end as Edgar here from the future remarks on how he messed up, how he saw something evil and ominous and deadly hovering around his daughter and assumed it was coming from her fiance Carson. I love, Matt, actually, that you picked up on this a while ago, right? That like this idea that the picture he drew, like I don't remember if it was last week or the week before, that you were like, I don't get this. This. Like, it seemed so ominous, so scary, so immediate, and like, just like he was kind of a dick and cheated on her, and then was unsure about the relationship, didn't line up with the way Edgar felt when he drew those pictures originally, and that's because he was wrong, and like you picked up on that. I thought that was great.
Yeah, and the tennis balls, the element of the tennis balls was a thing where I was like, there's something about this that just says to me that the source of the danger is not this like direct, obvious thing that Edgar is thinking about. I feel like that was a skillful red herring, because I was still able to imagine, like, yeah, sure, jilted fiance murdering her, that's entirely possible.
Yeah,
but it just didn't make sense to me. So anyway,
yeah, I agree, and I'm glad we kind of have that answered now.
Cool.
All right, chapter 16, The End of the Game. Another title this week doing double duty, I think, Matt. It's, of course, the name of the painting that we mentioned, but also it's the end of the game that Edgar and Percy have been playing here. When Ilsa is killed, the game has changed.
The game, right? It's no, or the way I was thinking about it is, it's no longer a game.
Yep.
It's now become serious for him. Yeah.
Yep. So the chapter begins with Edgar admitting he's kind of relieved that nobody important died. I love this paragraph so much. Humans are, in some ways, such complete shits, because Cayman and Tom, although close, stood just outside the charmed circle of those who really mattered to me. Those people Percy hadn't been able to touch. And if we moved fast, Cayman and Tom would be our only casualties. Like, I love Stephen King, man, because I don't know very many other authors who would just be so fucking honest to put that to page. Like, it's true. And everyone reading that is like, yeah,
but he shouldn't say it.
No, we don't say that, but I mean, that's how we work, right? We have our spheres, our circles, and like, we can be sad about it. Of course, you're sad, but like,
right? Well,
better with him than this person.
Yeah, right. You're like, you're like, I'm genuinely sad to hear that.
Yeah.
Where am I going to go to lunch later? And then there's like the people where you would like, it will ruin your life, right?
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, definitely everyone gets this.
So let's talk about this. I thought Percy was now afraid of me and my newfound talent. alone, still not recovered from my near-death experience, still suicidal, in fact. I might have been an asset instead of a problem, because in spite of all his big talk, that Edgar Fremantle really hadn't had another life. That Edgar had just switched the backdrop of his invalid's existence from pines to palms. But once I had friends again, saw what was all around me, and reached out to it, then I'd become dangerous. So, a few things here, Matt. I mean, I think this does perhaps slightly answer the question you posed before of like what Percy wants from him. At one point, probably something, but I think we've shifted now to she wants him dead, and that's it, right?
Yeah, right. I mean, sure. It's clear now that he's done something to offend her. I guess to me that's just a new mystery, honestly, where I'm like, well, what did she want from him before, and what did he do that changed her mind about this? And this sort of gesturally answers it, where it's like, well, he has friends again, and
yeah, he's got his cocktail,
and that makes him less easy prey, which means he can't be manipulated and used, and so yeah, just kill him. Sure, I guess I get that much. Yeah, I do get that much. Okay.
I do like this idea of, in spite of all his big talk, that Edgar Fremantle really hadn't had another life. That Edgar had just switched the backdrop of his invalid's existence from pines to palms. This idea that, like, we like to say, you know, oh, this is my new life. This is a different life, that I've left that life behind. And it doesn't really become true for him until Wireman, until Elizabeth, until Jack, right? That and until he recognized the beauty of the world. Like, the thing I love about this book is that obviously the painting is part of Percy's, you know, door into all the shitty things she does. But like, it does make pretty clear here that a lot of what Edgar does, not all of it, but a lot of what Edgar does with the painting, with the art creation, is just him. It's just him discovering this talent and realizing this part of himself that he had never explored before. And that is, I think, what that line means. Saw it was all around me and reached out to it. You know, both the people and the beauty of this place and the beauty of the world. I think that's great.
Yeah, I love that. Even just the fact that he has friends again. It's like, I was thinking about this. I was like, are we talking about the art show? And I was like, I mean, a little bit, but we're really just talking about Wireman.
Yeah, almost exclusively. A little bit Elizabeth, yes, but almost exclusively Wireman.
And Elizabeth has now died, which, I mean, yes, that was a real friendship, but now he doesn't have that friend anymore. So it really is all on Wireman, which, I mean, I think really amplifies our sense of anxiety, honestly, since they're going into this dangerous situation now.
Yeah, we don't know where Wireman is 4 years into the future. That's for sure, right? That is one thing the king has not told us. So,
we only know the ominous thing that has stuck with me, that Wireman is his fate, whatever that means.
Yeah. So finally, Matt, Edgar remembers what he has forgotten. Ilsa also had a painting. He tries frantically to dial her, but finds that the number has just dropped out of his head. He uses exercises, though, to remember it, and finds a very confused and very fucked with Ilsa on the other side of the phone. We learn that something has been whispering to her, telling her that Edgar was dead. It's Percy, of course, has been fucking with her through the painting. But it's okay now, Matt. It's okay. Edgar got to her in time. He's here. He gets Illy to toss the painting into the oven. It burns, and we're like, whew. Wait a minute. Wait. She's supposed to die. We were told that she's going to die. And this is, as I said, this is why you spoil it, right? Because you do this exact thing. You've given your audience an expectation, and now you've subverted it. You've confused us. And so that it makes the actual death just as shocking as if you didn't know about it at all. Because like, what? Like this... You fixed it.
Yeah. Okay. And you're totally right that is the emotional roller coaster that I went on, where I was like, Scott's going to laugh at me this week because Edgar was able to save her, even though I was so sure that she was going to die. And then we go ahead and we kill her anyway. So so the obvious thing was obvious. Yes. You've asked me a couple times, this week, I think once last week, like, am I frustrated? I will say that it is frustrating from a first person reader point of view to be jerked around like this. And I'm not like it's like, yeah, of course King is doing it totally on purpose. So I'm not, it's not a mistake. I'm not like criticizing his writing because he did it on purpose. He wants you to feel jerked around. He set up the fear that Ilsa would die, and then he seems to give her a reprieve over hard fought minutes of tense dialogue. And then he yanks all that away again. I felt very frustrated. I was, and again, this connects up to what I was saying earlier about Tom. It's like you're already feel so like pissed off about that because you're like, really, after all of that, he's just dead. I feel bad about this. I don't want to say I don't like it because that comes off as me saying I don't like the book, which is not accurate. It's just like it feels very bad. It really gets to me,
Yeah, and I mean, it at least asks the question that you already asked, which is, what is the point of all this? Are we is pointlessness and hopelessness the point?
Mm-hmm.
And if it is, that kind of sucks.
Yeah.
And if it's not, well, then why did we do this? Why were we this mean? Valid questions, certainly.
Yeah. I will say I don't think I ever really thought that Ilsa was going to live, because when the paper bit her on the hand, I was like, okay, well, it's like poisoned her using evil magic and she's going to die from the magical bite on her hand. So I didn't actually think she was off scot-free. I thought she was still going to die probably. And then when it's Mary Eyre instead, I was like, oh, this is even worse. We love Mary Eyre.
It's like, again, you never would have saw that coming because she fucking drove from Florida to Rhode Island.
Yeah.
No, I agree. Like the whole sequence when he's on the phone with her, and I love like, we already talked about the bit where he's like chastising Pam for not noticing what's wrong with her here, and then like she's like half falling asleep and he's trying to get her to get up to get the burn. Like it feels like we're in a race against time. I love the detail that she hung the painting in her hall, but it somehow got into her bedroom, and she's like, I must have done it, and it's just like fucking terrifying. I love all this. And yeah, I mean, I understand your frustration. I totally get that. I loved it. The first time I experienced this, I experienced all the things you're feeling. And then I was like, I finished it with, oh, Steven, you son of a bitch.
Yeah.
But I totally acknowledge like that, like the frustration and the hopelessness of it, for sure. And the meaninglessness of it. Yeah.
I don't know. I wonder if there's any component of the fact that my kids are not, Ilsa's age, but my kids are old enough that I don't really have that much trouble seeing them going off to college in my imagination.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
And so this feels scarier to me in some way. Like my kid is off and I can't actually physically help them. And I don't know, that I think this book has been pushing a lot of anxiety buttons in my brain when it comes to the idea of like having a kid who is like freshly out of the nest.
Mm-hmm.
And you're like, okay, I don't really know how to manage this. I don't know how to manage my own emotions about this. I don't know how to manage their emotions about this. And then you fucking kill the kid. It's like, fuck.
Yeah. I mean, it is interesting because, we've been talking about this a lot throughout the course of the book, that this has been a part of it, the adult child thing we've been talking about again and again and again. And it doesn't necessarily tie into the overarching themes that we've been harping on. And it doesn't have to, like books can be many things and do many things that don't necessarily have to relate to each other. But it just strikes me, this definitely was something that was on King's mind. And again, like you look at the age of his children when he was writing this book, and it's not like they were, fresh out of the nesters. They weren't. Yeah. They were in their 20s and 30s by this point. And so like it does strike me as interesting in that, like, why was King thinking about this so much? I don't know. Maybe one of his kids specifically was having a difficult time, and he was trying to feel out like that when that happens, like what his role is, and so it was on his mind. Or maybe he was just thinking about it, and not everything has to relate to his personal life.
Nah.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I agree though. It's interesting stuff. Like my kids aren't old enough for me to be doing what you're doing, but yeah, I mean, it's I've really enjoyed the parent child dynamic stuff that's been in the book.
Yeah, along the lines of what you were saying, maybe he's just reflecting back on experiences that he had a few years prior to the time of actually writing the novel.
Yeah, maybe. I do agree. Like when you're a kid going off to college, like your parents are just being annoying, and you don't relate to what they're going through at all, really, on any kind of emotional level. And now I can just very easily be like, oh yeah, that's got to be fucking terrifying.
Yeah. Yep.
Yeah. So the next morning, Edgar wakes up and heads out to the Gulf and sees, what does he see, Matt?
He sees the tennis balls.
He sees tennis balls, hundreds of them actually, as several crates of reject balls crashed up onto the shores of the key. Hundreds of tennis balls floating out in the surf. Edgar, the second he sees that, basically already knows, right? He sprints home. He finds a message from Pam waiting for him. The message, Illy is dead. Inexplicably, Mary Iyer drove all the way from Florida and murdered her. Matt, we knew this was coming, and it still just fucking sucks. It sucks. The way the news is delivered via a message, like from Pam, that it's just like, Edgar, the cops called me. They're saying Illy is dead. Like it's so sudden and immediate, and like there's no build up to it. I mean, I guess technically there is build up to it because he's sprinting along the surf and rushing to the answering machine. But then it's just like that it's a message, that it's not even a conversation that he learns it in. I don't know. There's something just about it.
Yeah. No, it's all very I agree completely. I felt a lot of that. I keep having to like say things and then hedge them, because it's like this section really made me feel bad. Like not and bad is such a almost weasel word, but it's like I don't have a better word. It's like it's not like it made me feel sad. It's not like it made me mad. I just felt like ill and unhappy after this section, and it's almost like I don't really even care if they get Percy. Like, if they stop Percy, it's like, okay, good, I guess. Fine. Edgar still lost his beloved daughter. Yeah. Whatever, Like, I don't know how we could possibly round this story out in a way that's not just utterly, desolate. And that makes me, I don't know. I can't think of any other King books that have really made me put me in this spot of just like, whatever, fuck it. The thing is, I'm pretty sure he's put me in that spot on purpose.
Yeah.
So yeah, to get back to the moment though, like this call in particular is just dragging us through that. Like it's really hammering in this feeling of just misery and depression.
It's awful. I mean, they're both like going through, I can imagine, is one of the worst experiences that a parent could possibly ever go through, right? Is losing your kid. And Pam is Pam. And she says some not very nice things here. But that's, Pam sucks. We've established this many, many times over the last 6 weeks. But I find it very difficult to fault her too much for the things she says in her anger and grief and absolute sorrow in these moments.
Yeah. Well, I feel like Edgar is basically in this moment like, yeah, it would have been better if I had died. You're correct.
She says you did this. She blames him for it, and he is like, "Yep, I did. You're right. Me. Yeah. It was me." And then that she says you should have died when that crane hit you. There was an awful thoughtfulness in her voice. I love that detail so much. That would have been a happy ending. And this to me, I find this fascinating because I had never considered the idea of survivor's guilt from this perspective. Often, you talk about survivor's guilt when you have this near-death experience and you survive, is like this guilt you carry towards the people that didn't survive, and like you survived, they didn't survive. But there's this other angle that this demonstrates here, which is like every shitty thing you do as a person for the rest of your life is now going to be like, well, if I hadn't lived, then I never would have done that shitty thing. And it's like I that must be, I can imagine that with me being this incredibly overpowering emotion that just destroys me. It's like, because you're a human being, you're gonna fuck up, right? You're gonna make mistakes, whether they be small mistakes or big mistakes. You're gonna make mistakes throughout the course of your life, and every mistake you make from the moment you survive this near death experience on would be a mistake that you wouldn't have made if you had just died. And like it's a ridiculous thing, because like that's true whether you've just lived, or like that's true for everyone at any moment, right? Like, but it's just it I could see my mind going there, and I'd never thought about this as a one of the twists on, barely surviving a horrible accident.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, I think it's not an element of it that I've ever really considered, but you're totally correct that I feel like that must be a thing that comes up. Yep.
Yeah. So in a daze, Edgar walks outside as the creeping and itching in his arm grows. It's at this moment that he remembers the final message from Elizabeth. Quote, "You will want to, but you mustn't." Too late, Edgar says. He snaps the end of the broom off and heads out onto the beach. We learn later what he does here, Matt, is just draw Illy in the sand. But in this moment, did you know what was going on here? Did you have any idea what he was about to do? The text is kind of intentionally vague here.
No, I did not. In fact, I'm not even 100% clear on what he did do, because I think we remain vague about that. But I do have a theory, which one of my classics, where it's either going to be spectacularly, hilariously wrong, or I'm going to get lots of credit. I at some point I thought, well, he has magic powers. And if I had magic powers and my kid died, the first thought that came to my mind would be, I'm going to try to bring her back, undo it.
Like in some sort of pet cemetery?
Some sort of pet cemetery type situation. And perhaps he succeeds. And perhaps this is actually super easy to do. And that's why there's a bunch of undead, actually undead people on the island, not just appearances of undead people. Is that Elizabeth successfully brought her sisters back to life, and amusing to consider that maybe they're not even serving Percy. Maybe they're just, Elizabeth brought them back to life, and so they're just hanging around. Of course, it feels more likely that they are just serving Percy. But these are all of my thoughts surrounding the question of the question of what did Edgar do. Immediately made me start thinking about like the pragmatic question of like, well, what would I do? And then also like, what do all these undead people have to do with, like, because we've got hallucinations which have no substance, and then we've got like literal undead humans, two very different types of thing, right? And then I thought like, well, the second one can be explained by the way this all works. So
yeah,
just some thoughts.
That's cool. I like it. I can't really comment on it too much. I mean, I will say like one of the things that we absolutely know that Edgar did was draw a picture of Ilsa on the beach. So yeah, we do know that now. I'm not saying whether he did anything else or what he was trying to do or what, but
right.
We know that.
Yeah, if there was a purpose to that beyond just what's the word, scrying. Yeah.
All right, chapter 17, our final chapter of the week, the south end of the key. This one's not really doing double duty here, Matt. It's just they're going to the south end of the key.
Well, Scott, it's like the bad and the south is like bad, and it's like the bad. Okay.
Why is the south bad, Matt? Why is the south bad?
Because it's down. Down is bad.
All right, fair. It's like in Hades. Where Persephone is?
Where Persephone spends half the year, yeah.
Mm-hmm. All right, time to take the fight to Percy, Matt. Edgar eats some post-art food, tells Wireman to listen to the messages and to wake him up in a couple of hours. He says they're ending it today. And several hours later, he's woken up by Wireman and Jack as they go through the story of what happened with Illy. Edgar fills in the details because, as we said a little bit ago, he painted her in the sand and has, therefore, through his magic power, been able to tell exactly what happened to her. He knows all the details of it. He knows it all, which is just the worst, right? Like, why would you want to do that to yourself?
Yeah, I agree. There's a lot of, I mean, so a lot of the bad feelings that I talked about in the last chapter are like even worse here because
Mm-hmm.
we're focusing so much on the interiority of Edgar's suffering as he
Yeah.
discusses things with his friends.
Yeah, yeah. And the details of what happened are just so off. Like,
Yeah.
so basically, we learn Mary Iyer drove all the way up to Ilsa's house apartment, knocks on the door, has a gun in her hand, forces her um, to let her in, knocks her out, puts her in a bathtub, and drowns her, and then sits down at the kitchen table and turns the gun on herself and kills herself. So that's some brutal shit right there.
Yeah, right. There's something about just layering on. Oh, yeah. By the way, Mary Iyer is also dead,
Mm-hmm.
which just, yeah, adding
And
insult
it's
to
like,
injury.
yeah, which is it's really interesting because like that's really sad, right? Like that's awful.
Yeah,
And this person was like become just a tool that was just used and dropped as soon as she was no inconvenient. Like this is a person like we didn't spend too much time with, we spent a lot of time with, and we learned about her, and like it is completely understandable that the text kind of just isn't even considering her in these moments because Ilsa's dead, and of course Edgar's not concerned with Mary Iyer. Like that makes total sense in a story from Edgar's perspective, but yeah, it
yeah.
sucks for her too.
Well, I think one thing that's sad about it to make it sort of maybe like overly myopically protagonist oriented, but like Mary Iyer was a kind of signal in Edgar's life that like, oh, like interesting women are still attracted to me, and like maybe there will be a future with this specific interesting woman. And there's tension between them there, and like you kind of feel like something might happen there, and then by taking that away, by killing that character, like from it's sort of like Percy is sending the message of like, no, you can't have that, you can't have a future, you're dead, you don't have a future, you can't have human connections.
Mm-hmm.
It's a very sort of visceral thing to do.
Yeah, I mean, you're so right, because obviously in the structure of the novel, like the reason it's Mary Iyer is because Mary Iyer was one of the only other ones that had a painting,
Mhm.
because she bought one of the girl in ship, and because she didn't have to travel, she just said, well, just give it to me, I'll take it home.
Yeah.
But yeah, from a doylistic perspective, like the choosing of Mary Iyer is very specific and cruel.
Yeah.
I think you're right there.
Yeah, it rips away like his future is one way of putting it.
Yep.
Yeah.
And I love like her last name's Iyer.
Mhm.
We didn't really talk about that, but her last name is Anger.
Yeah, that always stood out to me. I mean, Mary is also I mean, not like a rare name, but
Mhm.
like it has religious connotations to it, obviously.
She's Jesus's angry mom.
Jesus' angry mom, and I don't know. I always it's funny I didn't mention her name because I couldn't make heads or tails of exactly like what it means. But yeah, I always thought Mary Iyer was a cool name. That's why we always say Mary Iyer. We never just say Mary.
Yeah, yeah. So they pack and they prepare to go. Or actually, I wanted to talk about this. Like, one thing I just want to say generally here is the tone of this book has absolutely shifted, right? I mean, of course it has, like Edgar's daughter is dead. The tone of the book is going to shift and change. But like what I more mean is like how King writes Edgar from this point on. Like he's absolutely broken. And we see like we're being very explicit in how he's almost regressed. Like I think Wireman says he looks just like he looked the first day he came to Duma Key, like, or maybe it's Jack that says that. But he has this grim determination to get things done. And I think he's like I think he feels the way you feel, and which is just reinforcing like that King is doing all this intentionally. Like he's getting you into the head of this character who is just is angry at Percy and wants to kill her, but as part of him is like I don't care about anything anymore.
Yeah. Yeah, I think this is also sort of amplified by having Wireman there, who has gone through a very similar thing, who's just acting as this kind of mirror for everything that we're feeling, where he's being the in-story empathizer, and so we're empathizing with him, empathizing with Edgar in a sense, and I find that effect to be very powerful.
No, I agree. You're right. You're totally right. All right. So right before they go, Matt, Edgar uses his magic powers to break the drawbridge to Duma Key because he can just do that now.
Yep.
I don't know if you knew that.
I think that's one funny thing about this section is he just gives less and less of a shit, and he's just like it becomes very, very pragmatic about his power.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. There's this other thing that King does here, Matt, that I wanted to briefly talk about with you is, and it's a thing King does often, but I don't know if we've ever talked about it on the show before. As we transition from one scene or setting to another, King will often do these like mini table setting paragraphs that often like have their own section header, and he does this here. Like as everyone packs up, he's broken the drawbridge, he's done sketches of the two of them. We're not sure why yet, we'll see that in a minute. And then suddenly we break from that, we break from the current flow of events for this brief paragraph for Edgar to say, now I had memory. It was no longer in perfect working order, and to this day I sometimes get confused about names and the order in which certain things happened. But every moment of our expedition to the house at the south end of the key remains clear in my mind, like the first movie that ever amazed me, or the first painting that ever took my breath away. So I do think it's just interesting, and I've noticed this in King stories before. I've never like really brought it up and talked to you about it, but I do like that we have these like, okay, let's take a step back and just do like it. We're gonna set the table again before we carry on to the next thing.
Yeah. That's so interesting you pulled that out, because my mind has already been on structure so much anyway, right? And the way he links things together, I think, is one of the most sort of pleasurable parts about his writing, from just like the perspective of how it feels as you're reading, or listening, as the case may be, is it's just got this flow, this just endlessly pleasant flow where you never feel like you're caught off balance. And I think a big part of that is the way, as we connect ideas or moments or scenes, there's always a through line that you can follow, even if he has to do something like this to kind of hand you that through line, because maybe the through line's not super obvious. He always knows what it is, and I think this is a thing that he thinks about, honestly, is like, how am I going to preserve the sense of narrative flow and propulsion, and make it easy, make it feel easy for the reader to just make their way through this without ever feeling lost or frustrated for a single moment. I think that's part of what he's doing with this.
I agree. I mean, we have like complimented King on his like kind of ability to know exactly what the audience needs at any given moment. And this does feel like another one of those to me. And again, whether this comes in that mysterious process known as editing and revisions, or whether this is just something that he just innately understands as he goes through his drafts, who knows? But I like it. I like these paragraphs a lot. I like whenever we take these brief moments and by putting it in a section break, it emphasizes it more, it highlights it more, we're paying more attention to it. I really like it.
Yeah, I do too. And by the way, the painting referenced in this paragraph, "The Hailstorm" by Thomas Hart Benton. Of course, I had to look that up, and it's quite a striking painting. So I recommend you just Google it if you haven't.
I will. Do you think, like, once again, we have this image of Edgar as this person who we thought maybe he was, and like how choosing to draw and paint was almost a complete non sequitur for this random blue collar construction guy from the north, but like he's really into art.
Yeah.
Like how do you think most people would be able to remember the first painting that took their breath away? Like, I can't. I like art and I've seen a lot of paintings, but I don't know if I could tell you like the first painting that took my breath away.
No, I'm probably very basic when it comes to paintings, and I can name, like, I like the obvious ones. You know? Yeah. Mona Lisa, real good painting. But yeah, so I do like that he's not even aware of how much he actually thinks about art, but he does. I like that.
Yeah. So like the last time, Edgar begins to feel the itch and pain as they go further south. Wireman clearly does too, mostly coming from his bad eye. But Jack, like Ilsa, is just getting sick. The other two of them seem inoculated, but Jack is not. It's okay though, because Edgar draws a smiley face onto the picture of him, and the memory of Jack making out with a girl, it fixes him.
Uh-huh. Is it a memory or is it a vision?
Yes.
Okay. I actually thought, and maybe I'm just incorrect, but I thought it was like he could see Jack's future. He could see that there was gonna be this girl in his future.
Possibly. I mean, the only reason I think it was a memory was I think he instructed them to think of a specific happy thought. I thought
I see. Okay.
while he was drawing them.
Maybe so.
But yeah, who knows?
Right.
Could be both. Yeah.
Okay.
So they keep going. They keep carrying on. The landscape itself is doing whatever it can to stop them. I love the juicy black caterpillars that drop from the trees and burst open on the windshield so bad that they need to stop and get out and clean the windshield. Oh, so gross.
Uh-huh. Yeah, I love it. It's disgusting.
And ghosts are everywhere. Like there's ghosts of little frogs, ghosts of this little girl's imagination still out and about, just appearing on the road as they continue their way on. It's just perfectly creepy, perfectly tone setting. I love all of it.
Yeah. And I think it reinforces and subtly establishes that all these phantoms that Libet conjured are still around even after her death.
Yeah.
Which I guess has all kinds of implications, like that whatever you get up to when you use your magic on this island, it doesn't go away even after you die.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. No, which is cool, but terrifying.
Yep.
So they finally make it to the original Heron's Roost, and they find a special note from its former patron, Abyssus Abyssum Invocat, which not good, Matt. I think it's like hell. Hell invokes hell here, basically. Yeah. Like one bad choice goes to another.
Yeah, that's Wireman's explanation anyway.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah. They find the original Heron's Roost in tatters. The house is half collapsed, and Edgar, for the first of several times, wonders how the hell he's going to find the pictures that Elizabeth drew in this whole mess. We don't know the answer to that, but I guess we maybe kind of feel like, don't worry, he's going to figure something out.
Yeah. I honestly, I think part of me is absorbing Edgar's attitude of just like practical goal orientedness, but I'm just like, yeah, they'll figure it out. Like, I mean, there's definitely tension. There's definitely tension here, but I'm sort of like, it's almost, I almost just accept that they're going to win, which may, interestingly, maybe they don't. Like I should be open to the idea that, considering how this is, something of a story about futility, maybe they just don't. Maybe they don't win.
Yeah. Yeah, maybe. I don't know.
It's always possible.
As they go in, they see a flickering black thing, which turns out to be a monstrous ghost of a racist lawn jockey. It basically was Libet's personal boogeyman that has been co-opted by Percy to just kind of haunt the grounds and scare anyone away that shows up. Like, interestingly though, it's kind of like teleporting around the grounds, and it's really scary looking, but it doesn't seem to be able to hurt them at all. Like,
yeah.
We had the zombie guy, like, definitely was physical and could hurt Edgar, but if this thing could, it's not doing a very good job of it.
Yeah, I mean, I suspect that it can. I think, I guess I should have mentioned this back when, so I could have gotten credit for it. But I think I guessed even at the time that the big frog boy could not have actually hurt the girls that he chased into the water, and that his purpose was actually just to chase them into the water where they would drown. I suspect that the apparitions are indeed just phantoms, but the undead people are literally people who died and then were magically reanimated. That is my theory at this point.
Sure. The one thing we know for sure is that Libet had a very powerful imagination back in the day. What happened to it then? She forgot how to use it. Jesus, Jack said. That's horrible. Yes. And I think that kind of forgetting is easy, which is even more horrible. What do you think, Matt? Is it horrible to lose your magic imagination?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, even if it's dangerous and risky to use, I feel like that's a big part of oneself, right? I think that's one of the things we're doing here is you can't just say, oh, it's too dangerous. It's too dangerous to use. It's like, well, that you're sacrificing a huge part of your soul in doing that. Yeah. So
it's just like the breakers. To break is divine, man.
To break is divine. You have to. Do it. You can't not, right?
Yeah. They find the front door locked and a nest of potentially rabid bats right above them. So they elect to look for another entrance into the house. And as Jack and Wireman bicker over carrying the surprisingly heavy red picnic basket, Edgar sees a black shape slip out of the mud of the tar pit swimming pool and head towards them. The lawn jockey, Matt, might not be able to hurt them, but this alligator sure seems like it could. It's not a ghost alligator. Or is it?
It seems like it's just an alligator. The fact that it goes down due to gunshots suggests that it's just an alligator.
Yeah, fortunately, our boy Wireman is here once again, Matt, to save the day. This time, he brings out his motherfucking Desert Eagle and wastes the thing. Just absolutely destroys it. I love what the text says. I've never seen calm like that, and it still amazes me.
That's so great. It's such a great moment. It's a moment of like fun and lightness and like adventure in what is otherwise you're just kind of like grimly plodding through like this challenge. Yeah,
especially as a child who grew up playing video games and therefore got all my knowledge of guns from those video games.
Yeah, and
I actually know what a Desert Eagle is because I played Counter-Strike.
Yeah, there's 3 types of gun. There's Desert Eagles, and then there's Walther PPKs, and then there's every other kind of gun.
Of course, we called it a Deagle.
Yeah,
I don't know if anyone outside of people that play Counter-Strike called it a Deagle, but we did.
I know the reference, and I think I called it the PP7, not the Walther PPK, and I'm sure you know why that is.
I do.
No.
Because GoldenEye just changed the names of them?
Just changed the names of all the guns in GoldenEye, in the N64 GoldenEye video game.
Was that for like branding reasons? Like they couldn't get the actual names?
I have no idea. That's a good question. I wonder. I bet somebody knows.
A Desert Eagle is a very, very, very big handgun. It's very good at killing things.
It's a 50 caliber handgun, right?
Yeah, it's absurd. It's really absurd.
Which is bigger than really you would need a handgun to be.
Kick on it is I mean, again, let me be clear here. My entire knowledge of guns is solely from video games. So all I know is what the video game presents, but it's got a big kick.
Yeah.
For sure.
Yeah.
The recoil is huge.
Yep.
So they defeat the alligator boss and head on into the next level. Matt, one thing we haven't talked about is the heron that Edgar has seen. So back when they were kind of driving by the new heron's roost, Edgar sees a heron just kind of sitting there watching them, staring at him. While they're heading into old heron's roost, he sees another one, or perhaps the same one, kind of flying around, observing them. And here, Edgar commands Jack to shoot it if he sees it again. And I guess we're meant to assume that like the heron is a representative of Percy, but we don't know for sure.
Yeah, I mean, I think we've established with the alligator that the animals can be a threat, and that suggests that the heron might be. Made me wonder what kind of damage a pissed off heron could do. I probably would have dismissed this if we hadn't just read Desperation, and the thought of birds wasn't extremely on my mind.
We'll see. So was the alligator just normal alligator that was just like chilling, and there was it perhaps a real alligator but magically influenced alligator?
I think that, I think the latter, because alligators are not normally like incredibly aggressive toward multiple humans. I mean, they can be aggressive for sure, but that I don't think an alligator charging I I know alligators fairly well, considering
I need someone to clip that. I know alligators.
I can speak with some authority on the behavior of wild
I
alligators.
personally know at least 3 alligators.
I know that you can walk near pretty big wild alligators, and rather than eating you, they will usually just submerge. They'll do that thing where they just pretend they're a log and they just kind of submerge.
Mm-hmm.
So the fact that this one attacked, to me, suggests it was real, or suggests that Stephen King doesn't actually know how aggressive alligators are in real life, and that's also fine.
I mean, I think you're right with the we're being primed with the heron being like a spy or something, that the animals are just being cajoled into joining the whole "we hate Edgar" party that's happening here.
Yeah, just nudge them in the direction of being a little more aggro.
Yeah. All right, and this is where our chapter ends. The 3 get to the back of the house and plan to climb in through the pantry and go searching for what? For more pictures, for something, some answers, something to drown her back to sleep.
Yep.
And that is it. Next week, Matt, we finished the book. That's it. We've got just a few more chapters left and we're done with the book. So we'll find out all the answers to your questions next week and perhaps be able to come to a conclusion about this book as a whole.
I can't wait.
All right, let's move on to the discussion question. Last week we asked, I think a hard question, right?
Yeah.
Like we didn't get too many answers to this one, and I think because it takes some consideration. It's not like we orally ask like, what's your favorite version of this, and those are easy because everyone has a favorite of something. But this is a hard question, so we got less answers, but I do think they're really good answers. So let's get into them.
Yeah. All right. The question was, of course, how do you think King decides what to spoil and what to hold back? Pear Jane says, I think Matt nailed it. Well, thank you, Pear Jane. Stephen King is ultimately a compassionate person, and he doesn't like to blindside us with main character deaths. Sure, Eddie Kazbrak and Dean died suddenly, but it was in the heat of battle. But we knew some death was coming for someone. We just didn't know who. Telegraphing major events allows us to both emotionally prepare for the event and feel building dread until it happens. Carrie is a great example of this. That's far preferable to feeling authorially betrayed by a gut punch. I'm looking at you, Bridge to Terabithia, and one day, fuck you both. And no apologies for spoilers. I'm doing everyone a favor so you don't have to throw your book like I did.
Mm-hmm.
On the flip side, when he keeps a purposeful secret, it's usually in service of an action-packed climactic reveal. They're robots. And generally, I don't think it works as well, mainly because he still telegraphs that there's a big secret. He handles it like a poker player saying, haha, I have a really good card, but I'm not going to tell you what it is. Still love you, Stephen King. Of course.
Yeah, I wonder if there's truth to that like he's really, really good at the telegraph one and he's less good at the surprise twist reveal stuff. I'm trying to think of other examples of this.
I mean, their robots is one that jumps to mind.
And I don't think that doesn't work, but it's just like actually maybe it doesn't. I don't know. Like I do, and I'll have to listen back to our episodes about Wolves of the Calla, but like I feel like the reaction to that is always just like, huh?
Yeah.
Okay.
Right. Yeah. I mean, so everybody knows Game of Thrones at this point, right? Like, but by the time the big climactic reveal came off in the show, everybody was just like, yeah, I know. but that's, and that's not even because it was telegraphed. That's just because they took too long. So
are you talking about John?
I'm talking about John but like there's, that's not a good example though, because everybody just figured it out. I think a lot of times it feels out of left field because it's out of left field, and that is a bad reveal, because it's just like, oh, you could have. This is just a sharp left turn, This is not connected to anything. Where at least I don't know. It's interesting.
Well, I mean, it's the difference I think between like a Sixth Sense-esque twist surprise and like I think going back to the robots is a really interesting thing, because like the question of who or what the wolves are has been kind of asked throughout the entire book in that book.
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah.
that's one of the like, who are the wolves? What's going on here? And so I think the problem is in that particular instance, and comparing it to something like the Sixth Sense, like the reveal doesn't recontextualize the wolves for you.
Uh-huh.
Like there's nothing gained from that outside of, okay.
Yeah.
I mean, I guess that it changes your perception of the world a little bit, in that, like, you know, they're carrying lightsabers and look like Doctor Doom and are throwing Harry Potter balls, but like that does open up the world and do very specific interesting things that we talked about. But the actual reveal, like the actual of like they've been robots the whole time, is just like, okay,
Yeah.
sure. I don't dislike it, but I don't have any feelings about that whatsoever.
I think the feelings that I have in moments like that when they work is just like, oh, okay, that makes sense. And it's mildly gratifying. I think the central example, actually, after struggling to think about it for a second, is any murder mystery story. You know, we're reading Ton of French now, so that's on my mind, is like typically in a murder mystery, right? There's multiple suspects and you're trying to figure out who did it. And then when you finally are told who did it, you get the satisfaction of thinking like, okay, yeah, that makes sense because of this and because of this. And there's a satisfaction of things clicking together that were in plain sight, but you didn't put them together yet. So that's kind of the mechanism, is it's like you're either going to get, if you don't get satisfaction from it, though, then I agree. I think it's like the only cases where you want to actually just totally hide stuff from the reader is cases where there's kind of a lot of satisfaction to be felt. Okay, I just thought of another example though, which doesn't follow this rule at all, which is what happens in Worm, which I'm not going to spoil. But that one is not quite satisfaction. That one's more of a like, oh, holy shit.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think that the answer here, and we have a bunch of other questions, answers to read, that might go into this some more, but like, it's less to me a conversation about like what is the more effective method of doing this, because like it's going to be different for every author.
Yeah.
And to me, and more specifically to like, which is Stephen King better at? And I think the honest, absolute truth to me is Stephen King is much, much, much better at I'm going to tell you exactly how it happens, and then I'm going to make you feel invested and concerned and anxious anyway.
Yeah.
Versus the surprise end of book reveal moments.
Yeah, I think you're right. And that's just the kind of storytelling that he likes. Yeah, makes sense.
Next, we have Apocalypse Win 7, who says King has described himself as a suspense writer. To paraphrase Hitchcock, surprise is when two people meet for coffee and talk for 10 minutes, and then a bomb goes off. Suspense is when you see a bomb under the table and then watch the two people meet for coffee and talk for 10 minutes. King takes the Columbo route to suspense. In that show, we know the culprit from the beginning, and we know they will eventually be caught. But the tension is derived from the specifics of how Columbo will entrap them. This is exactly what King does. He often spoils the outcome, but not the journey. Right now, we know that Ilsa dies while Edgar is still alive, but we have no idea what confluence of factors would cause that to happen. King's tendency to spoil deaths is absolutely derived from compassion, but it's not to spare us the heartbreak in advance. It magnifies and prolongs the tragedy. King often picks a very warm and tender moments between characters to bookend with a sentence like, "And that was the last time they saw each other." It forces you to consider a character's position. We, hopefully, don't have a lot of experience with our loved ones being tragic and violent deaths, but we can all relate to saying goodbye to a loved one and having the intrusive thought, what if something awful happens to them while they're gone and I don't know it yet? Horror is a feeling of lack of control. Foreshadowing a character's death in advance signals to the reader that no matter how hard you try to row against the current, some things are just impossible to prevent. Yeah, Matt, that's what this book is about.
Yeah, I guess so.
No, I like what Apocalypse Win says here. Like you said last week, and I think Jane kind of agreed with you here, that like it's to do us a favor, but like he's letting us down easy a little bit here. And then Apocalypse Win is like, no, actually it makes it worse. It makes it 10 times worse.
I mean, it can make it worse for sure. Like knowing that the dread, the persistent dread that comes with knowing that it's coming can be worse in some ways, right? Because like I've said before, sometimes when the death comes out of left field, you're kind of like knocked out of the book. You're like, oh, that I'm just mad. I'm just mad at the author now.
Yeah, I mean, that was the red wedding for me. Like I literally threw my book across the room and didn't pick it up for a day. So
yeah, I think Bridge to Terabithia, like Bridget said, is one where I'm just like, why are you doing this to me? Like I'm not even like sad in the book. I'm just like, this was mean, you know? Yeah. All right. Steve Living Room says, I think King just needs to mix it up, keep it fresh. He'll tell us outright something is going to happen, and then when we see the drama and the anticipation of it building, but he'll also blindside us just enough to keep us on our toes. And that's what I think. He really chooses why based on how it feels in the long game of his books. Yeah, I guess the way I would phrase it maybe is like it is just intuition for him, especially at this point in his career. He knows what feels right, and because it's certainly not the case that he always spoils everything, right? So I think he just has a feeling of what is gonna work, what is gonna kind of keep the narrative flow working the best.
Yeah, I agree. And last, like I said, we didn't get too many answers to this one. Last, we have Aqualungfish, who says, this is pretty similar to what others have said, but I think King specifically makes his choices based on whether it concerns a character or a plot movement. If there's an important reveal coming about the fate of a character, he likes to give us the knowledge that something will happen, though not always what, and let us stew in it for a while. If it's a plot revelation, then he seems like holding it back for a big moment. As for the reason why, I've got a charitable and a cynical explanation. The charitable answer is similar to what others have said. He doesn't want to blindside readers with a beloved character death and make us feel like we were shortchanged. The cynical answer is that since we know he doesn't outline before writing most of his stuff, he might just not know what the big plot revelation is going to be early enough to smoothly foreshadow it. Since his strength is pretty obviously in character writing, maybe he just has a better feel for what's going to happen to specific characters rather than what will happen to the plot as a whole. Note, I do think King generally sticks the landing, but I also think a lot of times the actual plot ending of his stories aren't as prioritized as the character endings, so I wouldn't be surprised if he nails down the endings very late in his process. That's a great answer.
Yeah, surprisingly believable to imagine that he knows the direction or the shape or the feeling of the thing he wants to happen, but maybe the specifics have not been nailed down yet, and that feels very believable to me.
I think so too. I like that. I hadn't like necessarily tracked that it is always like almost always a character beat when he says that this was the last time I saw blah blah blah. Like that's almost always character specific and not plot specific. That's totally true. Yeah.
Good point.
Love it.
Yep.
And I totally agree actually that we've talked long about how we think people are unfairly cruel to King endings sometimes, but the character ending is almost definitely prioritized over an actual plot ending.
Yeah, I mean, I'm at the point now where I'm just like, that's all I want. That's all I care about, really, as a reader.
Same. Totally. All right. Well, that was great. Thank you, everyone. Still, as you said, less answers than normal, but I think those are some really good ones. And it was a really good discussion. I love having this particular discussion. I think it's really fun.
Me too.
Hopefully this next question will get a few more responses. Matt, what are we doing for this week's discussion question?
Well, so because this is basically the last discussion question for this book, because next week is going to be the mailbag. Scott and we each came to the table with a discussion question of our own, and we had a huge knockdown drag out argument over which one we would go with. And then we realized that we can do whatever we want, so we're just going to ask both, and you can pick one to answer. So the first option is, what's your favorite creepy overgrown ghost house? And the second question is, who's your favorite peripheral weird creepy monster? And
did you explain what a peripheral weird creepy monster is, Matt?
Yeah, so in the Talisman, how there's all kinds of weird shit in the in the periphery, not central. It's not our main villain, but it's just the weird shit around the edges, or the stuff that they encounter in the house on Nebolt Street, that is not the werewolf or the clown or what have you, but is some weird goo pile coming out of a mattress. Basically basically take your attention away from the central villain and pay attention to the other creepy shit that exists, and not necessarily just Stephen King. It can be any story, obviously.
Yeah, I like it. And as a bonus question for 10 extra points, which question do you think was Matt's and which was mine?
Yeah, that's sure. Why not?
I think you got a pretty big hint here in the reading of the questions, but we'll see.
We'll see.
All right, folks, that is it for us here this week. As we said, next week we're going to reach the end. We're going to finish Duma Key next week, and then we'll have our overview episode coming the week after that. I think we can announce now that Kim C from the Underrated Stephen King podcast is going to be joining us once again for our overview episode. When we met with her back to talk about it months ago, one thing she said to us was that she absolutely adores Duma Key, and we were like, well, then we got to have you on. So we arranged it all the way back then, and we're going to be having her to chat about Duma Key when we get to our overview. So look forward to that. But first, we've got to finish the book, and that is what we'll be doing next week, not month. Jeez.
Great. Can't wait. Also, remember, you can reach us via email at kingslingerspod@gmail.com, on x.com at kingslingerspod, and over on the subreddit at reddit.com/r/doofmedia. And of course, as always, you can get your if you podcast me, then podcast me mug over on doofmedia.myshopify.com.
Matt, someone bought 2 of those mugs while we were podcasting just now.
That's amazing.
It's great. It's an extremely popular mug. It's good quality too. I have it and many other mugs.
Yep.
I'm drinking out of one right now. It says Kingslingers on it. It's great.
Nice.
If you're not already subscribed to Kingslingers, come on, man. Come on.
There you go. And if you like any of our shows and you want to support them, please head on over to patreon.com/doofmedia. and click all the buttons that you see on the page, just all of them.
Yeah, and don't forget to come to Bangor this summer on June 15th for the live event. There's 44 tickets left. There's 44 of you out there listening right now that probably live within a couple hours of Bangor, Maine, and are like, hey, I want to go hang out for a few hours and with cool people.
Yeah, it's right there.
It's right there. It's right there. Of course, if you cannot afford to donate, that is absolutely okay. You can help us out by sharing this podcast with all your Stephen King loving friends. They'll be in Bangor. You won't be, but you can still share the good news with them. You can also help us out by leaving us a rating and a review. This week's review comes from JCT1276, who says, fun trip back along the beam. Great revisit with these guys through a story I loved with lots of additional perspective I didn't and wouldn't have seen by myself. Well, JCT, thank you so much. I hope that's what we do every week. You know, I hope we're adding perspective and perhaps getting people to think about things they hadn't quite thought about in these books yet. So I hope job well done then for us. Thank you.
Yeah, I appreciate that. Thank you so much.
Mm-hmm. All right, folks, we're finally done. We're going to be back here next week to finish Duma Key. Matt, what's going to happen? What's going to happen, Matt?
Everything's going to be just fine.
We'll see. All right, folks. Long days and pleasant nights.
And may you have twice the number.